Hey everybody, how you doing? Dr. Heldman here, Tech Talk Education. We're having a beautiful spring. Just had a little bit of rain and the lawn and the garden looks nice and fresh. In this movie, I want you to consider what we would do without hard disk drives. They're called HDDs in servers, computers, things like that. If we didn't have a way to store the data, then we would not have a very good computing environment, would we? So this movie is about the sorts of engineering that's been going on in terms of designing and improving the way that we write data to hard drives. Now, this isn't talking about solid-state drives, SSDs, but the technologies are essentially, the engineers are looking at these things basically the same way, how to get bits onto a surface. But in this case, what we're talking about are HDDs. Very interesting, very informative stuff. Let's get started. All right, so this movie is entitled The Future of Hard Drives. I'm talking about HDD technology here, not SSD. That's a very, very interesting topic as well. But as you might imagine, there are still lots of physically spinning hard drives, not SSDs, which were all electronic and solid state, but spinning hard drives that have an actuator arm, and they're all over the place. They're in all of these data centers, lots and lots and lots of data stored on these things, and we need to figure out a way to make them faster, more responsive, contain more data. That's the point with what's going on here. These engineers that are thinking about this kind of thing. Now, all over the world, everyone is hungry for data. The internet and AI, gaming, complex AI resolution models, etc., etc. Data is in demand all over the world, and we have to have a place to store all this stuff. And so that's why we are worried about traditional hard drives. So a traditional HDD, they're reaching their limits. But we need new development to go in and enhance their capabilities, make them better and last longer and contain more data. So that's the point of what we're trying to get at here. Now we want to understand how a conventional HDD works. It really has not changed a whole lot over the years, although the techniques used to write the data to the disk have improved, and of course the way to expand the amount of data that fits on the disk has improved as well. So that's the sweet spot that we're looking for here. That's what we're trying to concentrate on. Now let's talk about what's inside a conventional HDD. So on the drawing here, you have a conventional, this is what's called a mechanical hard drive, and it has on it what are called platters. So the gold thing, the copper colored thing here, is a platter. When we write data to the platter, we write what are called tracks. And so I have put some rings on here to show that these are imaginary, of course. It's all magnetic. It happens electronically. But the idea is that we have these tracks written to the hard drive here, and we can count the tracks. We know how many tracks fit on a hard drive. So that's one component you need to be aware of. We have this thing called a platter. And then we also have a read head. It's called a read head or a write head. And that's what this looks like here. So this thing is actually able to go inside and outside based upon a motor that causes it to seek and look for the data that it's looking for. And so we have a read-write head here. So those are the three terms that you need to be aware of. This is just conventional HDD. This has been around for decades. And of course, it's been steadily improved. You should be aware that even if we have just one platter, the reality is that the read-write head can read both sides of the platter. So in effect, we have a two-sided platter, and that we need to keep that in mind. In newer HDDs, there are several platters and several read heads. So we'll look at that in just a minute. You should also be aware that there's this term called areal density, and what it does is a way of us measuring how much data we can put onto a hard drive, and it's measured in a couple of different ways. It's measured in tracks per inch. So if you look here, I've got 4 tracks here. I've got a little ruler here, and I can cram 4 tracks per inch on here. This is no way accurate. I just did this to give you a visual idea of what's happening here. So that's TPI, tracks per inch. There are also bits per inch, and that's the amount of bits that can fit on 1 inch of space on the drive. Now, when designers are talking about these concepts here, we talk about a thing called the areal density, and it's not spelled aerial like in the air, A-R-I-A-L. It's spelled aerial, but it's pronounced areal density, and we talk about it in terms of gigabits per square inch, or in sometimes terabits per square inch. Now, you should be aware that both measurements are per platter, so that's going to be important to us, because if we can expand the number of platters in the system, that will help us gain more space on the drive. And then this little guy right here, this little silver U-shaped thing, is called an actuator. A lot of engineering and activity going on in terms of the actuator. Now, areal density, meaning how much data we can fit on the drive, can be increased by either increasing TPI or BPI or both. Tracks per inch, TPI, BPI, or both. Here's an example of what Western Digital has been doing. Over the years, I've purchased hundreds of hard drives. You can purchase them for your personal machines. You purchase them for servers. In the cloud environment now, we have thousands of servers all over data centers all over the world. These things are running mechanical hard drives, and this is what the inside of one looks like. So this is a Western Digital drive. Now let's take a look at the picture here. So first of all, you have what they're calling a triple stage actuator. This thing has 3 different ways that it's getting the head to move in and out, the read-write head to move in and out of the drives. And they have a metaphor. They're like, well, if you think about your arm is connected to your elbow, which is connected to your hand, and then everything's connected to your shoulder. So you have a 3-point pivot. That's what they mean when they talk about triple stage actuator. They're like, if your hand was wrapped in a cast, it would be very hard to move it in and out. So I think that's a really appropriate metaphor that Western Digital has come up with. Now, in this case, you have 9 platters, and they can hold a total of 18 terabytes of data. And then each one of the platters has an actuator arm. You can see all the actuator arms that are sitting there that are capable of going inside and outside. So that's how we're accomplishing these things, and it happens through engineering and through coming up with better and better and better designs. Now, one thing you should know is that there's a lot of what they call turbulence inside the hard drive. So as the drive's spinning, there's air flowing, and there is turbulence created on the drives. To minimize that turbulence, this is really interesting. Designers have said, well, maybe what we do is we inject helium into the hard drive, and what that does is it reduces the turbulence on the drive, and it allows us to create skinnier platters. So this is a pretty primary concept here, that we want to get this platter size down, but in order to do that, we have to decrease the turbulence on the drive, and they're actually putting helium into these things. If you go out and read some of these blogs, like the Western Digital blog, it's super interesting, the engineering that these guys have done. But the point here is that they had to go to battle with this helium. It wasn't exactly the easiest thing to solve, but that's the case there. And then, of course, we talked about the actuator, and we want to produce more ways to cram more data onto the same space. That's what we're after. Now, we've got to define a couple of old terms here. These are old. It's called data recording, magnetic data recording, because we're just magnetically putting things on the drive. We're putting little bits on the drive. And there are 2 methods. There's an old method and a new method. The old method is called longitudinal magnetic recording. It's called LMR. And the way to think about this, I think, is really appropriate. If you think about a bunch of ants, so the ants represent different bits. These are data bits here. And these ants are sitting on the platter, and they're one right behind the other. So they're longitudinally one right behind the other. you'll have the basic idea behind LMR. So the magnetic bits that store your data are laid flat end to end along the surface of the disk like these ants lying horizontally in a line. They're called magnetic grains. The engineers call them grains. They're parallel to the disk surface. And they use the word longitudinal, but they're parallel. And there's a limit to how many bits can fit side by side. Too close, they start interfering with each other, like the ants bumping into each other. Now, LMR was in use in hard drives even right up to 2005, 2006. So it's a technology that's been around a long time. That's LMR. Now, there's another one called PMR. This stands for perpendicular magnetic recording. So you think of it this way, the ants are standing up on the platter, not laying down on the platter. By the way, when the ants are laying down on the platter, I'm going to continue the metaphor because I like it a lot. You could have one ant that's reversed, one ant's head's going this way, one ant's head's going this way. That's not so much the big important part. The important part is understanding how they lay down on the platter. So in PMR, perpendicular magnetic recording, what's happening here is you have the ants standing up, which you don't have to be a genius to figure out that allows us to cram more data onto that platter. And the ant could be standing on its head or standing right side up. So in this case, the magnetic grains, they're called magnetic grains, are perpendicular to the disk's surface. This allows more bits in the same space because the upright ants take up less surface room. PMR also, this is interesting, makes the magnetic signal more stable and easier to read. So that is really a breakthrough that we came up with PMR. PMR became the standard starting around 2006. It's still used in many CMR devices, hard drives today. We're going to define CMR in the next slide. Before we do that, I want you to think about the amount of engineering that goes into something like this. This is incredible. Back in the day when I was teaching high school, I had kids that wanted to become hardware engineers. They had this idea about going to, like ASU and studying hardware engineering and going to work for somebody like Texas Instruments or Intel or AMD or whomever. And that is a great goal. But it takes a village. You know what? When these guys are working on these hard drives, there's a lot of people working on them. Mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, computer engineers, materials engineers, because the material that we're using is going to be important to us. There are physicists that are involved. There are programmers and so forth. So it's a lot of people that are working on this design. By the way, the designs have gotten so small now that you can't really aim a microscope. I remember years ago when I was working with a company that built a lot of their own equipment. They built their own cards and stuff. One of the hardware engineers was looking through a microscope at the card, but today you can't do that. They have to use electron microscopes to do that because the sizes are so very, very small. It's a very, very interesting area, and if that's something you're interested in going into, it'd be a good fit for you. There's a lot of need for people like this that are in this space. Now let's talk about CMR. So this is conventional magnetic recording. This hasn't changed a whole lot. I want to be honest with you. The idea is basically the same. We have the write head and then we have a read head. So if you picture the actuator on the hard drive, it's got a read head and a write head on it. The write head is bigger than the read head. So the write head is a little bit wider than the read head, and this is using CMR. And we have another technique called Shingled Magnetic Recording, SMR, and we're going to talk about that in another slide. Now, CMR is interesting. If you think about writing things down in a notebook, you're moving longitudinally down the notebook and you're writing these characters in the notebook. That's essentially what you have going on with CMR. It's just like you write sentences neatly on lines of paper. The write head is wider than the read head, which ensures that we have good, clear, strong writing when we get ready to write this data to the disk. Now you can read and rewrite any line without affecting any of the other lines. It'd be like you taking an eraser and erasing one word and then replacing it with another word, that sort of idea. It's a loose analogy, I give you that, but the idea is pretty good. It helps you think about how this is happening. Now, CMR is useful for everyday computer use. I have a desktop that I use. I also have a laptop. My laptop has an SSD in it. My desktop has an SSD that's running the operating system, and then a conventional mechanical drive that's storing all of the data that I generate from, you can imagine these videos are pretty voluminous. They take up a lot of space. So these are good. CMR is good for everyday computer use, for servers that have frequent reading and writing. And I want to stress to you again that we're predominantly talking about server hard drives, because this is where all the action is happening these days. You know, you go out and you buy a conventional desktop today, you're likely is not going to get an SSD. You are definitely going to get an SSD if you buy a tablet or a laptop. So we're really talking about server-based hard drives at this juncture, but you can get hard drives like this in your computer as well. It's also good, CMR is good for databases, games, and system storage. Anything where we're doing writes and rewriting, that's the idea behind CMR. And if you could keep the metaphor of, you know, note paper, you're writing on note paper in your head, that will help you understand how that works. It's important to keep in mind that the write head is bigger than the read head. Now, this has changed a little bit because now we have SMR, Shingled Magnetic Recording, and this is a little bit different. And the metaphor is, I'm sure you've seen roofers up on a roof putting down new shingles. So the idea is that the shingles overlap one another, and it's the same with SMR. So in SMR, the write head is still wider than the read head. You need to keep that in mind, but the approach is a little different. So you imagine overlapping roof shingles. That's where this thing derived its name. Each data track overlaps the one before it, very similar to laying shingles down on a roof. This allows more tracks, i.e. more data, in the same space, thus providing a higher drive capacity. The problem is that if you rewrite one track, you might disturb overlapping tracks, and so you could say that you're editing the bottom shingle, meaning that you must lift those above it in order to edit that shingle, underneath that shingle. And so the trade-off here now is you get higher storage capacity, you get slower write speeds, especially for frequent rewrites, which makes SMR more ideal for things like archival storage, where I'm just going to back something up and hang on to it, or for backup drives, or a term that I want to give you is called write once, read many. It's called a worm drive, where we take and, for example, we copy a video to a drive, and then we can just replay the video over and over and over again, because we're never going to rewrite to the drive. We just read from the drive after that. That would be a worm drive, and so that's why SMR is good for that kind of a drive. Now, there are some problems. So due to the unique SMR operation, a write operation cannot overwrite data that's already on the drive without corrupting the data that's already there. Engineers have come up with very elaborate schemes to overcome this problem. One of the schemes they came up with is they put the data into what are called append-only zones. Now, append means to write something to an area. So they came up with this idea of append-only zones, which prohibits the ability to overwrite them. But there are only a few hundred megabytes in a append-only zone size. When the append-only zone is full, the data must be written to a completely different location, and the existing area is marked as obsolete. This means, of course, that one has to perform very deft data handling and drive management in order to accomplish the goal. So it's not all smooth. You know, you have to think about the other problems that they encountered as they were inventing these new techniques to do this work. Now, here's a comparison for you between CMR and SMR. CMR track layout is side by side. SMR is overlapping. CMR, the rewrite speed is fast and flexible. SMR is a little bit slower due to the overlap, the shingles overlapping one another like that. Capacity is standard, but you can get more on a disk using SMR. And the best use case for CMR is for things like general use, OSs, databases. On SMR, we would think about that for backups, archives, and infrequent writes. Now, let's talk about how these companies are doing some of this work. I'm going to introduce you to 3 companies. These are in the enterprise world doing enterprise hard drive design. And there are 3. There's Western Digital, Seagate, Toshiba. There are certainly others. These are the big 3 players, though, when it comes to HDD space. They're all thinking about ways that we can increase this areal density. We could increase it through TPI, tracks per inch, or BPI, bits per inch. Almost all of the companies are trying to increase it using BPI. Now let's take a look at this and see how this works, because it involves heat. Not a good thing to introduce in a hard drive, I admit, but the idea here is that we're going to introduce heat. So let's look at Western Digital's approach to this. They have introduced a technology called energy assistance perpendicular. That means we're upright like this, and they show the media greens down here standing up. They're perpendicular. Energy assistance perpendicular magnetic recording, ePMR. Now, Western Digital has patented this. If you look at the graphic over here on the right, you've got this heat source here that is blowing down onto these grains, and that's what allows us to concentrate and get much finer grain placement onto the platter. If you go and you read this blog, it's a good blog. Whoever wrote it did a great job with that blog, introducing you to this technology. As you might imagine, it can get very, very deep. They've done a good job explaining that, and they're saying that the engineering was pretty ponderous. The concept is straightforward. You just use an energy source, such as a laser or an electric current, to temporarily heat the magnetic material on the disk. Note the key word temporary. It doesn't heat it full time, but of course, as we're writing, that thing is going to be heating different areas on the disk. It makes it easier to align the magnetic grains during the recording process, thus allowing more data to be packed into a smaller space. This is Western Digital's approach to this. I have purchased Western Digital drives. I like them a lot. I recommend Western Digital. They're a great company, and they make super, super good hard drives, especially in the server space. I wanted to talk about this because I thought this quote was interesting. This I found in the blog. Western Digital engineers were talking about what it took to create this technology. They had quite the challenge. Let me read this. This comes from a guy named Terry Olson. He was a senior technologist on the Western Digital Advanced Magnetic Recording team. He said the head on a hard disk drive is flying. I love that phrase. So if you picture the actuator, it's just above the platter, and it's moving in and out of this platter. It's very, very precise. It's amazing that they can get these things to work this well this way and not get all bonky or wonky out of order. And also, if you think about it, if you moved a hard drive, the thing has to stay pretty put. So this stuff's pretty solid. It's amazing. So this thing is flying about 10 nanometers above the platter. How big is a nanometer? It's not very big. It's smaller than the hair on your head. And it's only 10 meters off of that platter. The width is about 50 nanometers, so it's 5 times wider than the distance that it is flying over the disk. Even a microscope cannot see the actual writer because that uses visible light. We use an electron microscope. It's called electron microscopy, scattering tiny particles, electrons, off this thing to see what it looks like. So they're using electron microscopes to do this work. And it says the 10 nanometer fly height is analogous, check this out, to flying a 747 less than 1 inch above the ground without touching the surface. That's how delicate these sorts of engineering operations are. Now, let's talk about Seagate. Their technology that they're purporting is called HAMR. It stands for Heat Assisted Magnetic Recording. So the concept is the same. We're introducing heat because we can cram more bits onto the surface, more of these bits. Like Western Digital's ePMR, HAMR uses a laser to heat a tiny spot on the disk during recording. Once heated, the spot can be magnetized with a much smaller magnetic field than would otherwise be required. So these bits, these grains, we can cram more grains onto the surface, allowing for more precise and dense data recording. And they have a really good graphic here. I took this directly off of the Seagate site, and I would encourage you to go to read about Mosaic, which is going to be their release on these things. You should be aware that these are still in engineering. They've been released, but they're not ready for prime time yet. Like, you can't go out to Amazon and buy an enterprise class Seagate HAMR drive today. Ultimately, you will be able to. And I'm sure you can get them now. I'm sure that there are vendors that are supplying these to cloud providers and things like that. So that is Seagate's HAMR technology. And then we have another company that's huge, Toshiba. It's a Japanese company, very, very big. And they are widely regarded in the HDD environment as well. Their technology is called Microwave Assistant Magnetic Recording. It's called MAMR. The thing that is interesting to me about this is, rather than using lasers to heat up the surface of the platter, they're using microwaves to do that. And so they use a microwave energy to assist in the magnification process. By applying microwave energy, you need to get this term because these engineers use this term a lot. The magnetic anisotropy, the magnetic properties of the material, in other words. Now, that's why I mentioned a materials engineer in a slide a little while ago, because you're going to have people that need to know about materials and how they respond to what the company is trying to accomplish. Could be that one material is going to work better than another for what they're trying to accomplish, and they call it anisotropy, the magnetic properties of the material. It's temporarily reduced, making it easier to switch the magnetization direction of the grains. And they have several iterations of this. One is called Flux Control MAMR, FC MAMR. Another one is called Microwave Assisted Switching MAMR. Now, I should let you know that all of these companies are shooting for past 20 terabytes. So 20 to 40 terabytes is where we're trying to go. And so when we're talking about these technologies, you're going to see some drive capacity ratings. I'm going to show those to you in just a minute. You should be aware that they're, like with Toshiba, today you could obtain a 20 terabyte drive, but of course all of these companies want to get this pushed out into a much, much larger capacity. What do they look like? Well, here they are. So you can see the Western Digital has a hard drive called an Ultrastar DC HC690, and it says that it is a data center SMR drive. So still using SMR. Shingled Magnetic Recording is still using that, but the concept now is that it is using heat to write these grains to the drive in a much, much smaller and more confined area. And you can see the capacity has gone up to 32 terabyte. You're not going to get these drives for $100 on Amazon or eBay. That's not going to happen. These are very, very expensive enterprise class drives. You got to think about the engineering that's gone into them and all of the machinations that are involved in creating something like this, including injecting them with helium so that we reduce the turbulence on the drives. It's really sophisticated. Seagate's introduction to this is called the Exos drive, the Mosaic 3 Exos. And then Toshiba has what they're calling the Enterprise Capacity Hard Drive, the MG series, and is capable of holding 20 terabytes. One of the drawings I saw had 24 terabytes on it. And so also you should understand how many platters they have going here. Western Digital seems to be leading the four right now, but of course these guys are all in competition with each other. They're all seeking to outdo one another. And so Western Digital has 11 platters, Seagate has 10, and Toshiba has 10 as well. Now I do have a question for you. Do you enjoy my movies? I hope you do. I love making them. I love creating content like this, partly because I'm selfish and it helps me study and learn more about these technologies. And I haven't had a banana split in probably 30 years, but it looked yummy to me. If you're enjoying these movies, I would encourage you to please subscribe to my channel, share my channel with others. So I'm trying to grow the channel. And if you have comments that you want to put on these videos, love it. I get a lot of good comments from people. Thank you for that. And thanks for listening. And I will talk to you in the next video. Have a super wonderful day.